But after that triumphant concert, and then this suddenly.
Yeah, it was it was a shock for us. I mean, when I heard yesterday.
Just before Ozzy Osbourne passed away, he shared something deeply personal with Tony Iommi that broke everyone's heart. Sitting in silence after his final concert, Ozzy whispered a truth no one knew. What was this all about? Were they about his career or personal life? Join us as we unravel the details of this unexpected revelation. The end of a legend. Ozzy Osbourne wasn't just a famous rock star. He was known for his crazy lifestyle and amazing voice, and he was the symbol of heavy metal for many years. But beneath all the fame and madness was a man dealing with his own struggles, which eventually led to a peaceful end at home. Ozzy was born with dyslexia and believed he also had severe ADHD, making learning and staying focused difficult for him. He battled substance misuse throughout his career, even attributing it to his constant tremors. In 2003, he was finally diagnosed with a genetic type of Parkinson's disease called the Parkin2 gene mutation after years of uncertainty. This form of Parkinson's progresses more slowly than other types but is still serious. Despite the diagnosis, Ozzy remained positive. In a 2020 announcement, he told fans that he wasn't dying from Parkinson's but had been living with it for a long time. However, the condition brought about changes in his life. He now required daily medication, had experienced hearing loss, and often struggled to hear and understand others, something that fans saw on his family's reality TV show, The Osbournes. In early 2019, Ozzy was hospitalized because of serious complications from the flu. His illness turned into a respiratory infection, and he ended up getting pneumonia. He had to cancel his European tour dates because he was already weak. While he was recovering at home, he had a fall which caused more injuries and made him cancel the rest of his performances that year. In 2020, he had to cancel a North American tour and went to Switzerland for treatment. That same year, he disclosed that he had also been diagnosed with emphysema. By 2025, the effects of Parkinson's disease had taken a bigger toll on him. Ozzy was unable to walk or speak clearly, but he was still able to perform one last time before his death. This final performance took place at the Back to the Beginning farewell concert, which marked the end of his career on stage. Ozzy passes away. The thing that everyone is feeling today is shock. We all knew that he wasn't very well, but after that triumphant concert, Ozzy Osbourne passed away at his home in Buckinghamshire on July 22, 2025, at the age of 76. The reason for his death was respiratory failure from advanced Parkinson's disease. His wife Sharon Osbourne and children Amy, Kelly, and Jack were with him when he passed away. The family issued a statement saying that Oz's death was expected and happened with planned medical supervision. Sharon had a significant role in organizing everything before that day. Ozzy had expressed he didn't want to pass away in a hospital through personal talks and written instructions. From July onwards, the family held private meetings to plan his final care at home. They arranged for medical staff and equipment to be available and organized every aspect of his last moments for peace and dignity. The Osbournes kept everything private and didn't involve the media or others. They used legal representatives to handle all communication and did not allow any access to the press. 3 days before Oz's death, there was a final video call where he said his goodbyes using eye movements and facial expressions. Jack mentioned that Oz's message indicated it was time. Sharon was the only one allowed in Oz's room during his last moments. She later shared a letter publicly where she wrote that they had fulfilled their old promises. Ozzy passed away without any medical machines or last-minute medical procedures. He was alert during his passing and had his loved ones around him. His body was kept in a private room before being buried in a location he picked out. The funeral was small and private, only for family members with no outsiders allowed, and Sharon planned the entire ceremony. During the service, the music that was played included new songs that Ozzy had recorded after his accident in 2019. The last song played was a special remix of See You on the Other Side, which was chosen by Ozzy himself in 2023. So, who is Tony Iommi, and what were his final words to Ozzy after his demise? Tony Iommi's painful goodbye to Ozzy Osbourne. On the morning of July 23, 2025, sadness still hung over the world like a heavy cloud. Everyone was still in shock over the death of Ozzy Osbourne. That was when Tony Iommi, Oz's close friend and longtime bandmate, finally spoke. For many years, Tony had walked beside Ozzy through fame, addiction, healing, and constant changes. But now, for the first time, his voice trembled with pain instead of strength. He didn't speak like a rock legend. He spoke like a grieving friend. In an emotional interview with ITV News, Tony admitted that the truth hadn't really sunk in right away. "I woke up and it hit me like a ton of bricks," he said, his head low and his voice full of sorrow. Tony talks about his feelings about Oz's demise. It couldn't sink in. I think it can't be. I only had a text off him the day before. It just seemed unreal, you know, surreal. Just a few hours before Ozzy passed away, Tony had received one final message from him. The words were short and tired. Looking back, they now felt like a quiet goodbye. He said he was really tired. No energy left. Tony remembered that message now haunts him. At the time, Tony had a bad feeling. He thought something wasn't right. Now he believes Ozzy had pushed himself to the limit just to perform one final show. Tony talks about Ozzy pushing himself for his final show. The astonishing thought that he was just holding out to do it because this meant everything to him, didn't it? Doing this concert. He's built up for it for a while now. He's been sort of training. And Tony shared how Ozzy had looked weak during their last rehearsals. His body couldn't handle much anymore. Because of that, they made sure he didn't spend too much time on stage. He would sing a song, take a break, and talk about the past with a tired smile. The show wasn't about hitting every note perfectly. It was about honoring the years they had spent together. It was about remembering their journey and giving Ozzy one last chance to do what he loved. According to Tony, everyone could feel it. This was goodbye, even if no one said it out loud. The hardest part came when Tony spoke about Ozzy's final wish. It wasn't anything grand or flashy. Ozzy didn't want a world tour or a big goodbye party. He only wanted one last chance to thank his fans, and he wanted to do it in Birmingham, the place where everything began. It was meant to be a small performance, no lights, no glitter, just a man saying goodbye to the people who had been there from the start. He wanted to go out doing what he loved and where it all started, Tony said softly. That was all Ozzy asked for. Finding out that Ozzy had planned this goodbye in his own quiet way was heartbreaking for those who loved him most. There was no public announcement, no big statement, just a man sitting in his chair giving everything he had left for his fans. It was his final gift. As Tony said, "Geezer Butler and I didn't just lose a bandmate. We lost our brother." To Tony, Ozzy was not just a singer. He was the one who gave life to Tony's music. He brought wildness to the calm, fire to the structure. Their friendship wasn't built on fame or money. It began in the smoky streets of Birmingham in moments of laughter during their school years and in shared dreams of something bigger than the world they knew. As Tony spoke, people everywhere listened, not just because of who he was, but because his sadness felt familiar. People saw their own grief in his words and in his tears. They remembered the man who once made them feel like nothing could break them, even though he had quietly been preparing to leave. Before the fame, before the loud music and screaming fans, there were just two boys in Aston, Ozzy and Tony. Their friendship didn't start in fancy studios or at flashy concerts. It started in the tough, smoky air of Birmingham's working-class neighborhoods. Back then, dreams seemed too big for a life surrounded by factories. They met at Burfield Road School in the early 1960s. Long before the world called them pioneers of heavy metal, Ozzy, whose real name was John Michael Osbourne, was the class clown. He was loud, full of jokes, and always making people laugh. He struggled with reading and writing but made up for it by lifting the mood around him. On the other hand, Tony was quiet, thoughtful, and serious. He didn't talk much. He paid attention to everything. Even at a young age, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. They were very different, but something deep connected them. They didn't live far apart. Both came from homes where money was tight, and both carried the same quiet fear, ending up working in a factory like so many others. But what brought them together was stronger than their differences. They both wanted to escape. They both wanted music, meaning, and more than what the world expected of them. Later in life, Tony would look back on those days with warmth. He remembered Ozzy not just for being loud but for having something special in his spirit. There was something about him that couldn't be ignored. As Tony remembered these moments, his voice shook with emotion. Through all the memories, good and bad, it was clear how deep their friendship ran. This wasn't just the end of a music career. It was the end of a lifelong connection between two boys who once dreamed together in the streets of Birmingham. The world lost a star. Tony lost a part of himself. But why was this so painful for him to bear? How far have they gone before Ozzy's demise? To understand this, we need to take a few steps back to the birth of Black Sabbath, the band that made them more than friends. The journey of Ozzy and Tony from Birmingham to the world. Birmingham wasn't the kind of place known for creating rock stars. The skies were often gray, and life was hard. But from that tough city, two boys began to dream. They didn't start as best friends. In fact, they barely knew each other in the beginning. But time, struggle, and the streets of Aston slowly brought them together. What began as short greetings in school hallways became something much deeper. They shared silent dreams and the same hard life that pushed them towards something more. Most evenings, they would run into each other after school, sometimes in back streets, sometimes during walks home. Over time, music started becoming part of their conversations. Before anyone had ever heard the name Black Sabbath, before Ozzy stood on stage in front of crowds, before Tony played his heavy guitar riffs for the world, there were just two boys. One was always joking around. The other was quiet and thoughtful. Somehow they clicked. Maybe that's what made their connection so strong. Even after decades of chaos, fame, and heartbreak, deep inside, they were still those two boys from Aston who hadn't forgotten their roots. Their relationship wasn't just about music. It was the kind of bond that lasts even after fame fades and life gets messy. Tony Iommi, now in his late 70s, doesn't just miss a bandmate. He misses the kid who made jokes in class, the guy who goofed off backstage, and the friend who never stopped being Ozzy. That kind of friendship doesn't disappear. It has become a legend. In the early 1970s, something loud and wild came out of Birmingham. It didn't sound polished or safe. It was heavy and dark. It was the birth of Black Sabbath. And with it, the birth of heavy metal. For Ozzy and Tony, this wasn't just music. It was how they survived. It was how they spoke. It was their answer to a life that seemed to offer nothing but factory work and struggle. Their first album, Black Sabbath, came out in 1970. It wasn't just an album. It was a storm. The first song opened with church bells and thunder, warning everyone that this was not like anything they'd heard before. It was raw. It was loud. It was dark. Tony's guitar sounded like something from another world. Oz's voice cut through everything, haunting and filled with feeling. Together, they captured how an entire generation felt, angry, afraid, and lost. Just months later, they released Paranoid, the album that made them stars. Songs like Iron Man, War Pigs, and the title track Paranoid weren't just popular, they became anthems. These songs were bold and full of emotion. War Pigs slammed war leaders. Iron Man was about revenge and being misunderstood. Paranoid, written in just 20 minutes, hit home for anyone who had ever felt trapped in their own thoughts. As their fame exploded, they didn't slow down. Albums like Master of Reality, Volume 4, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage kept pushing limits. Tony's guitar playing became even more daring and creative, even though he had lost the tips of his fingers in a work accident. He made his own fingerpieces and kept playing, giving the band its heavy sound. Meanwhile, Oz's lyrics became more personal, talking about addiction, mental struggles, and the dark side of fame. They didn't pretend to be perfect. They put their pain into every word and note. By the mid-1970s, Black Sabbath was one of the biggest bands in the world. They played to packed stadiums and sold millions of albums. But behind the music, things were getting hard. The pressure was high. They were always touring, always expected to do more. And slowly, things began to crack. But even then, the link between Ozzy and Tony remained strong. Tony once said, "What we created together was bigger than any one of us." Their shared history, the school days, the dreams, the friendship, held everything together. Their songs weren't just music. They were lifelines for anyone who felt alone or different. At first, critics didn't get it. But years later, bands like Metallica, Slayer, and Iron Maiden would call Black Sabbath their biggest influence. By the end of the 70s, they had sold over 75 million records. But more than that, they had shown that two boys from a poor city could make their mark by being different. Their music wasn't just popular. It lasted. It stayed strong through changes in music and culture. In the later years, when Ozzy and Tony played together again, the feeling was still there. Every song reminded them of where they started and how far they had come. But by the late 70s, all the fame and stress started catching up. Ozzy was in trouble. He was using substances, drinking too much, and struggling inside. In 1979, things reached a breaking point. Ozzy kept missing practice and acting out. The band was worried, so Tony made a painful choice. He asked Ozzy to leave. He didn't do it out of anger. He did it because he was scared they were losing him. Black Sabbath went on. They brought in other singers like Ronnie James Dio and Ian Gillan. They were amazing in their own right and added new sounds to the band, but something was different. Without Ozzy, the heart of the band was missing. The songs still rocked, but the special magic between Ozzy and Tony was gone. Ozzy's life got worse before it got better. He ended up in jail, rehab, and came close to losing everything. But somehow he found a way to fight back. He launched a solo career that shocked everyone. Songs like Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley showed he still had what it took. He was back and on top. Even with all the success, both Ozzy and Tony felt something was missing. It was like they had never finished their song together. Fans dreamed of a reunion. Rumors would come and go, but nothing happened until 2011. After years of not talking, they finally sat down again. The connection returned right away. They laughed, shared stories, and began to make music again. In 2013, Black Sabbath released *13*, their first album with Ozzy in 35 years. It shot to #1 in countries like the United Kingdom and the United States. But it wasn't just about the charts. It meant that time hadn't destroyed what they had. Even though drummer Bill Ward wasn't part of it, the soul of Sabbath was still there. Their final tour, called The End, was more than just concerts. It was a journey through their entire story, through pain, joy, mistakes, and memories. Crowds cried as Ozzy, older but still strong, stood next to Tony once more. The music was slower. The voices were rougher, but the power was still there. It didn't feel like just a show. It felt like healing. Tony later said, "We'd been through everything. Fame, fallout, addiction, near death. But standing beside Ozzy again, it felt like home." That feeling wasn't just his. The fans felt it, too. It was more than a reunion. It was something deep, something real, something that no time, no distance, and no struggle could take away. So, what final moment made people fear that it was Ozzy's last time on stage? And why did they think so? Let's find out. The night Ozzy Osbourne said farewell. On the evening of July 5, 2025, something unforgettable happened at Villa Park Stadium in Birmingham. Ozzy Osbourne, known around the world as the voice of Black Sabbath and a pioneer of heavy metal, gave his last performance. But this wasn't just a concert. It was his final message to the world. Ozzy didn't walk onto the stage. He couldn't. He was battling Parkinson's disease and still recovering from several major surgeries on his spine. Instead, he sat on a special leather throne with wings made just for him. That chair was more than furniture. It was a symbol of his strength and courage. Though his body was weak, his spirit remained powerful. That night, over 45,000 people came to the stadium to see him, and nearly 6 million more watched from home. Everyone thought it was just a major concert, maybe a celebration of his return, but it turned out to be something much deeper, his final goodbye. Tony talks about Ozzy's final performance as his final goodbye to fans. "We think he held out to do it, and just after that, he's done it and said goodbye to the fans." The concert was named Back to the Beginning, a way to honor Birmingham, the city where Ozzy's musical journey began. It was in that city that he met Tony Iommi and formed Black Sabbath. On that night, everything came full circle. The original Black Sabbath members reunited for the first time in 20 years. There were no big light shows or special effects, just the music. It felt pure, simple, and honest. This was not a performance meant to impress. It was one last moment of connection between a legend and his audience. Several big bands like Metallica, Slayer, Guns N' Roses, Tool, and Pantera also came to play, paying their respects to Ozzy. The crowd cheered, cried, and stood in awe as Ozzy gave everything he had left. His voice was not just loud. It was filled with emotion. He didn't just sing the words. He poured his whole heart into them. You could feel the weight of his years, his battles, his triumphs in every note. Backstage, those close to him could see how much effort it took for Ozzy to perform. Tony Iommi, his longtime bandmate and friend, later shared that they believed Ozzy had held on just to make it through that night. Ozzy himself once said that he'd rather pass away singing in Birmingham than stay in a hospital, and he truly meant it. After the show, there was no big party or loud celebration. Ozzy was tired. He was quietly wheeled into his dressing room to rest. But before that, he made one last visit to Tony's room. With a small tired smile, he asked, "It went all right, didn't it?" That simple sentence carried more meaning than any song or speech. It was a quiet way of saying that everything he'd done in his life had led to that moment, and he was at peace with it. No one knew what Ozzy told Tony privately later. Those words only came out after his passing. On the night of July 21st, just 2 weeks after the concert, Ozzy passed away peacefully in his sleep at his home in Buckinghamshire. His wife Sharon and their children were by his side. He was 76 years old. The next morning, the world woke up to heartbreaking news. Headlines struggled to capture the loss. Fans around the world lit candles and left messages at his childhood home in Aston. Famous musicians from different styles like Elton John and James Hetfield shared their memories and feelings. They talked about how Ozzy's voice had changed music forever, but nothing hit harder than the silence that followed the news. It was the kind of silence that says everything. That concert also raised a massive £140 million for Parkinson's disease research and Birmingham Children's Hospital. But more important than the money was the message. The show was a portrait of a man who, despite being physically weak, stood strong in spirit. He didn't say goodbye with words. He said it with his presence, his passion, and his final performance. When the song Paranoid played for the last time and the lights dimmed, there were no fireworks or big finales. There was just a gentle wave from Oz's trembling hand, Tony Iommi's tearful eyes, and a crowd that understood they had witnessed history. In that moment, the world didn't just lose a musician. It lost a powerful, one-of-a-kind voice that could never be replaced. Tony Iommi, the one person who had been with Ozzy through all the highs and lows, was left to hold on to the final memories of that night. And the few words he spoke afterward captured what millions were feeling: there will never be another Ozzy. But just as people were trying to accept the loss, Tony revealed something else. Something that would break the world's heart all over again. So what is this revelation that left fans in tears? The confession and the end. In the final stage of Ozzy and Tony's journey together, they created something more honest and meaningful than anything they had made before. It was not just about music. He had regained someone who was more than a colleague. He had regained a brother. While many other music partnerships had ended in silence or resentment, theirs told a different story. It was about second chances, about coming back stronger, even after everything had fallen apart. When Ozzy passed away, messages of love and remembrance came from across the music world. But one voice stood out among all the tributes: Tony Iommi's. To him, this was not simply the death of a bandmate. It was the loss of a lifelong connection that had been shaped by hardship, rebellion, and music. When asked what Ozzy meant to him, Tony's answer was simple but deeply heartfelt. It carried not only sorrow but also deep respect. The world had lost someone truly special. Tony's words were not those of a famous musician honoring another star. They came from someone who had shared a lifetime of real personal experiences. He recalled the laughter first. He remembered the times behind the scenes, the unexpected jokes Ozzy would crack during a show, the silly faces that would break the tension. These were not planned moments. They were just Ozzy being himself, spontaneous, wild, and full of a light that could push away even the darkest feelings. There were times during performances when Ozzy would pull a funny face out of nowhere, and Tony would laugh uncontrollably. That was one of Ozzy's special abilities. He could take the most serious situation and remind everyone that they were still human. But the act of remembering is never easy. Along with the joy comes the pain. Tony could not help but relive both the great achievements and the difficult times. He remembered the fame, the success, and also the periods when they were apart, when addiction and personal problems kept them from each other. He thought back to the difficult months when Ozzy had become unreachable. The world had seen the public troubles, but behind those moments were deeper struggles, and still, they found a way back. Their reunion in the year 2013 for the album *13* and the global tour that followed was more than just a musical comeback. It was the rebuilding of something personal. Against all expectations, they rediscovered the rhythm they once had, not only in music but in their bond. During that time, Ozzy spoke with both humor and emotion about how lucky they were to still be standing, to still be making music. Yet, one particular moment stayed with Tony more than anything else. A few days before their final show, Ozzy told him quietly that he did not think he would survive the concert. But he also said that if he was going to leave this world, he would rather do it singing in Birmingham than lying in a hospital. Tony never forgot those words. He could not answer in the moment, but later they echoed louder in his heart than any guitar ever could. Tony believed that Ozzy knew what was coming. He chose to say goodbye in his own way, through music, in the city where their story began, with the people who mattered most. That final performance was not a grand show. It was an intimate, heartfelt message to Birmingham, to the fans, and to their friendship. There were no fireworks or elaborate effects, just Ozzy seated in a specially made leather chair, his eyes filled with exhaustion and determination, holding the microphone as if it were his last link to life. He gave that night everything he had left. His emotions, his memories, his entire legacy poured into each word and note. Then, without a dramatic exit, he left the stage quietly and became part of music history. For Tony, it was not just a concert. It was the ending of a story that had taken over 50 years to write. It was a story made up of sound, emotion, laughter, and sorrow. Ozzy was not only known as the Prince of Darkness. He was also once a boy from Aston with dreams, with mischief in his heart, and a belief that his voice could carry him beyond his struggles. He never pretended to be someone else. He lived with intensity, cared deeply, and never felt the need to say sorry for who he was. Ozzy's legacy goes beyond his songs. It lies in the way he touched people, the way his voice could push away fear, and how his wild energy became a strange form of comfort. His music offered strength in different places, from the front rows of packed arenas to the quiet corners of hospital rooms where listeners faced their own battles. To many, his music was not just sound. It was a safe place. That is what, in Tony's eyes, made him live on even after death. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe and also click the next video shown on your screen.